Welcome to the High Income Business Writing Podcast, helping you propel your writing business to a whole new level. And now, here's your host, Ed Gandia.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the High Income Business Writing Podcast, the number one podcast for freelance writers, copywriters, and solo marketers who want to earn more in less time doing work they love for better clients. With over 1.4 million downloads from listeners just like you across 101 countries. You know, a few weeks back, I sent a survey to my readers and listeners, and it was nothing fancy. It was just a handful of questions, mostly open-ended rather than multiple choice. And the survey was basically asking the following: what's actually on your plate right now? How are you feeling about your business? And where is the friction in your business right now? Now, I've been running surveys like this for going on 15 years or so. And I'll be honest with you, I almost didn't send this one because I thought I already knew what I would hear. Now, didn't get a huge sample set, but nearly 60 of you responded, 58 to be specific, and I opened it for a week. I didn't want this to be an open-ended survey that ran for weeks and weeks. Not a huge number, but I tell you, I read every single response, and then I picked 4 people from the survey and got on Zoom with them. No agenda, no pitch, just listening. I wanted to know more about what they shared. And they had volunteered. So one of the questions was, if I wanted to follow up with you and ask you a little bit more about what you shared with me in the survey, would you be open to a quick conversation? Actually, the overwhelming number of respondents said yes, no problem. Now, when I got on the phone, when I got on Zoom with each one of these 4 individuals, I told them the same thing. I said, look, I'm not selling anything today. I just want to understand what you're dealing with. I want it to be a very open conversation, and that's what we had. What came back from all of that, and I mean the survey and those follow-up conversations, really surprised me. In fact, it was surprising enough that I want to walk through that with you today because, first of all, the last person I interviewed suggested it, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. And I also thought that a lot of you are going to hear yourself in this. And I think it's important information to share. Now, I don't want to set the wrong expectations here. This is not clickbait. I'm not going to reveal something to you that's going to shock you. I think if anything, this is probably going to resonate with you and probably also be helpful in that it'd be maybe good to know what others in this community are experiencing and what they're feeling right now. So let's start with the predictable part of what survey respondents shared. For 15 years, I've been running these surveys, and I've run about 1 or 2 a year. So there's been quite a few. But the top answer on every single survey that I've run has been some version of, I need more clients. And I mean every time. It's not even close. Typically 70 to 80% of you pick that option without a second thought. It's the freelance business equivalent of gravity. You just expect it. And of course, I had that question, and getting more clients or I need more clients was one of the choices. So this is one of the few multiple choice questions. Now, this time, here's what's interesting. This time, getting more or better clients, that option still won, but only 34% of you picked it. 34%, not 70 or 80 or 90. 34. And that was really surprising. And that's when I just couldn't wait to get on the phone with some of these folks. My first reaction was, okay, maybe I asked the question a little differently this time. It had been a couple of weeks since I had written the survey question, so I had to go back to the survey and look at it again. But no, I didn't do anything different from what I typically do. It's the same phrasing I've used for years. And just so you know, here were the answer choices for that question in terms of what their biggest challenge is right now. Getting more or better clients, what to charge and how to package my services, my positioning or what I can even offer now. So that was choice number 3. The actual work taking too long, my website or my online presence, figuring out how to best incorporate AI into my workflows, staying visible and marketing consistently, the back office and admin side of things, and then something else. And that was an open field and they had free reign. Basically, they could write anything in there. So yeah, it's the same stuff. I mean, I could have listed another 5 or 6 options. What I have found is if you give too many options, people it's too much and they just pick something just because there's too many choices. So I had to keep it tight. And by including that open-ended choice, I was able to get some really good intel from that as well. And what's interesting, and I'll get more into that here in a minute, is that that's really where a lot of the nuance appeared. When you combine it with the other answers to the other questions, it just told a very interesting story. Now, something actually shifted as well in the responses, because coming in a close second at 24% was a category that basically didn't get much response in old surveys, and that is positioning. What do I even offer now? I didn't call it positioning. Actually, I did. I'm looking back at the responses. Is my positioning or what I even offer now? Okay, so I wanted to define what that was so it wasn't just a buzzword. And that was unexpected, at least to me, being that it was the second one. It typically doesn't make the top 3. I certainly was not expecting it to be so popular. But here's where it got really interesting. I went back and reread the open-ended responses from everyone who picked getting more clients as their biggest issue. Not just in the multiple choice. What I wanted to know was what they actually wrote in their own words to some of the other questions, because there were many open-ended questions. And I wanted to see that because I just felt that there were some clues there and I wanted to dig further. So I spent some time with those answers. And what I found is that a good chunk of them, and I'd say somewhere between a quarter and a third of them, were not describing a client's problem at all. So again, these are the people who picked getting more clients as their biggest issue. But when you read between the lines and when you read what they were saying to some of the other questions, they were describing something else. Something that was, you could say, wearing a I need more clients costume. But that's what it was. It was a costume. Like it wasn't the real thing. Now, let me dive a little deeper because I saw the same pattern across several answers. One person picked clients as the biggest issue and then spent 3 paragraphs describing what she called niching paralysis. Every time she tried to sit down and figure out her direction, she said it felt like picking a college major all over again. Big, permanent. It felt like the change that you can't replace, that you can't fix. And she had no way to know where any path would lead. And that created anxiety for her. Another person picked clients also as the biggest issue, but then wrote almost as an aside that she has severe imposter syndrome and she's starting to wonder if she's even in the right business anymore. A third person didn't even mention clients drying up because of the economy or bad marketing. Instead, she mentioned that her clients started pulling work in-house because they're using AI themselves now. That's more of a relevance problem in my mind than just a pure, I need more clients problem. So here's one conclusion that I came up with, or that I came to. I need more clients is the easiest box to check on a survey, especially that kind of question. What's your biggest issue right now? It's the symptom that's always visible. And that's why it's kind of the easy thing to pick. But when you actually dig into why the clients aren't showing up or why the work feels hollow, even when the clients do show up or when you're very busy, a lot of the time, the real issue is one step upstream from that. It's way less of a pipeline issue and much more of not knowing what you'd fill this gap with, let's say. And that's a really interesting observation that I made when I started connecting all these dots. So let's talk about that, because that I need more clients challenge, I think, deserves to be picked apart a bit more. Sure, you feel like you want more clients. And God, I've been there so many times. But okay, you want more clients, but doing what for them exactly? For whom? Because for a lot of you, I don't think the honest answer is more of the same. I think it's something new, and you haven't quite let yourself fully unpack this idea. You haven't sat with it for long enough. You haven't really pondered it at a deeper level, which brings me to the theme that showed up over and over again in the survey and even more in the conversations that I had: the word pivot. Now, that's not my word. It's the word many respondents used. Person after person used that exact word unprompted. It wasn't in any of the choices or anything like that. Where it kept appearing was in the open-ended responses. I read things like, I want to make a pivot, or I need to pivot, or I'm trying to figure out my next pivot. Nobody told me to use that language. Again, it wasn't a multiple choice thing. It wasn't anywhere really in the survey that I could tell. They just used that word. And when I say pivot, I don't mean that people are panicking. That's not the impression I got. Most of the folks I talked to actually have very decent and healthy businesses right now. They have steady clients, they have real income. So it's not that. This is something more like the work still pays the bills, but it stopped meaning anything to them. One person told me almost exactly this, and I'm going to paraphrase, but she said something like, I can do this work in my sleep now. It used to feel like, holy cow, could I actually pull this off? But now that feeling is completely gone. So to me, that's much more of a, who am I now? That kind of issue. And AI didn't create it out of nowhere. I think AI is the thing that's forcing the question that's been sitting out there for a while. So here's how I've come to think about it. For most of your career, the bottleneck was in the middle of a process. I call it the middle because it was production, getting the words down, right? So upstream from production is the thinking, the strategy, the planning, the decisions. Then midstream, and that's the production layer, that's the writing. That's, again, producing the content, the copy. And then downstream from that is the judgment layer. I call it the judgment layer, which is basically making the final decisions, right? The editing. Is this worth publishing? What needs to change? How and where could we use it? So producing the work used to be the bottleneck. There were only so many people who could do high quality work in a very specific field. I don't mean that there were only a handful. What I meant was there weren't millions of them. So clients had to go finding the right person. That's no longer the bottleneck. The bottleneck has actually moved to both ends. It's moved upstream because now there's a constraint that's all about figuring out what's even worth making or creating in the first place. The questions you ask yourself, the quality of those questions now matters more than ever. And then downstream is super important. That's a new area of friction because now it's so much about judging whether the output is actually any good, especially if someone without your level of expertise and skills is producing it with an AI model. So the middle, the part that you may have built your whole identity around, and I'll use that word very purposefully. I didn't say business, your identity. That's way more meaningful than a business. So that part, that isn't where the value lives anymore. And because it's tied to your identity, that's disorienting for a lot of people. And I can totally understand that. So as I dug into these conversations, I started to notice that the pivot people are describing something that actually isn't one problem. It's three different problems depending on where they're standing. And I think this framework that I'm going to share with you is going to be useful if you resonate with what I've shared so far. Because as I started having these conversations and I spent some time pondering what I heard from people and then what the survey respondents shared with me, it started fitting somewhat neatly into three different buckets. Now, this is a complex set of issues. Everyone has a different flavor of it. I'm not trying to put people in boxes and try to solve this problem in a very neat way, but I think there is some utility in having some sort of way to organize your thinking, a mental map, if you will, that kind of helps you process what's going on and maybe gives you a better idea of how to think about it and how to start solving it. So the framework has 3 parts. And the first part, or stage, let's call it stage because they kind of flow one from the other. The first stage is deciding. So someone who's in the deciding phase is someone who genuinely doesn't know what's next for them. And it's not because they haven't thought about it. In many cases, they've thought too much about it, maybe even overthought it. But the problem is it's very noisy in their head, and they tend to shoot down every option they consider in about 30 seconds. One lady I talked to ran through 3 or 4 different directions in the span of a few minutes in our conversation, and then she picked apart every single one of them before I could even ask a follow-up question. So when she mentioned strategy work, she right away said, well, I say that, but I don't feel like I'm an expert in strategy. Positioning against AI, she quickly said, yeah, actually, you know what? I don't even hate AI, so that wouldn't be an honest take or an honest framing or positioning. Then she started getting into maybe a speaking and a workshop path, and she said, maybe, but I don't know what topic I would even do that on. So I heard it. It was almost like her thoughts were live, and instead of just being quiet in her head, she was just sharing exactly what her thinking process was, which is very noisy. And look, I've had the same, and still to this day, have very noisy conversations in my head. Now, what she said next after that is the whole ball game. And honestly, it's probably the most important line in every conversation that I had. She said, I need an idea I truly believe in before I'm willing to take that step, because taking that step is scary. And when I heard that, I realized that this is an issue of conviction. And you can't think your way to conviction alone in your own head. I don't care how smart you are. Believe me, I've tried. This is something that's very, very difficult to do on your own. So that was that first stage, deciding. The second stage, this came up in several conversations, is validating. So this is someone who's actually picked a direction. Even a rough one, doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. In fact, in most cases, it wasn't fully formed yet, but they had no idea whether the market wants it. They weren't sure if this is really something they could make a living on. And I spoke with someone who had already started doing the work on her own. She'd spent a few hours mapping out a new way to position yourself and set up a content plan. She even reached out to a couple of people for what she called informational conversations, basically asking, hey, is this a real problem for you? Would you actually pay to have it solved? And then she told me something I wasn't expecting. She said, I'm so averse to asking people for things that just having that idea to ask for a conversation felt like a revolution to me. So this is someone who's been in business for 12 years, I believe, and she had never once asked someone for that kind of conversation. 12 years. Now, I found that to be very interesting. And you know what? She's not alone. I know for a fact that this is an issue for a lot of writers. So her stated problem was, I can't pick a niche. That's what she told me initially in the survey, and that's kind of what she came into the conversation with. But really, when you look at her other answers and when we had that conversation, the real problem, the thing that was actually underneath all of that, was that she had let her entire professional identity get built by other people. Specifically, in her case, by referrals, by what other people knew her for. And picking a new direction meant she'd have to be the one to say who she is out loud for the first time. That meant she had to plant her flag somewhere where she had high conviction, where she was really excited, and she had to put it out there out loud for the first time. That's a much bigger ask than help me pick a niche when you think about it, right? That's more like asking someone to become the author of their own reputation instead of the recipient of it. The third stage is planning or sequencing. Okay, so think about it. They go in order. The first one, again, is deciding, then validating, and then it's okay. So I validated, how do I start sequencing next steps or creating an action plan and start taking action on that? I talked with someone who had already decided which direction she wanted to move into. In fact, she'd already validated it. Clients were asking her for it without her even putting it out there. She's even been getting paid for pieces of her ideas here and there. What she's missing is the order of operations, the how, the timeline, the what do I do first? And it was very clear when she started talking about that piece, you could just see it in her face. She just got overwhelmed. It was too much for her. And she put it about as clearly as anyone else could. She said, I work really well with strategic steps. I know what I need to do. I just haven't been able to figure out that piece out yet. So I haven't figured out how to deconstruct it, how to create an action plan, how to stay accountable, how to iterate as I move, in that direction. She actually said that once she starts moving and builds momentum, it wasn't too big a problem. It's just the starting, because just putting that plan in place felt like just extremely overwhelming. And then she said, I've been doing all of this in a vacuum. She said, and I quote, I've used AI to help me think through it, and AI is great to talk to. But, and again, I'm quoting her here, she said, it only gets you so far and it pats you on the back a lot. And that made me laugh because it's so true, isn't it? These tools have gotten better about it, but they're still sycophantic. AI, it can be a phenomenal thinking partner. But, at the end of the day, it's not human. It doesn't have that level of judgment and taste and discernment and empathy. It doesn't push back the way a person with real stakes in your success will push back. It's getting better, again, but it still wants to please you. And, for the most part, it goes along with you. So there you have it. I mean, to me, it was so interesting that this was very much an issue of making decisions about the next stage, the next pivot, the next act in someone's business or career, deciding in some cases, validating some ideas that they had narrowed it down to, and then sequencing or planning the next steps to making it happen. And those are 3 different jobs. And depending on where you are, the help you need looks completely different based on, where you are and where you're weakest in those 3 areas. If you're deciding, a marketing plan is useless to you, right? You need conviction at that stage. You don't need a plan. If you're validating, more brainstorming is just going to spin your wheels. This is one that I've had a lot of trouble with in the past because I'm really good at generating ideas. But, sometimes you got to stop the brainstorming, and it's time to what? You need to go out there and get real signals from the outside world. And honestly, in a situation like this, you probably need someone to make you ask for it because a lot of you are more allergic to that than you realize, as with the example of the person I talked to who was really averse to asking for that kind of help and getting feedback from others. And if you're planning and you're trying to build and sequence your plan, you need someone experienced enough to tell you what order to do things in and to catch the thing that you can't see because you're too close to it. So maybe to point out where you're overcomplicating the plan, where you have things out of sequence. Now, let me give you a few more numbers from the survey because it was some really good quantitative stuff when I dug in. I've given you mostly qualitative stuff, but I think these numbers tell an important part of the story. 88% of you said you want your top problem solved right now or within the next month or 2. 88%. Okay, that's pretty urgent. Only 2 people out of 58 said no rush, someday. So this is obviously not a someday list, even for the people whose businesses are actually doing fine. That's a really good point, because for a lot of people, they were doing well, but they were in a hurry to try to get resolution to this issue that they were having. So here's a stat that I think is the most telling one in the whole survey. Roughly a third of you has spent $500 or more in the past year alone trying to solve this exact problem. And about 1 in 7 has spent over $2,000 trying to solve this problem. Now, you would think the people who spent the most money on this would be the ones who most want a course or a template or a swipe file. So something they can just kind of grab and run with on their own because, they've already spent that money and they have the sunk cost there. But it was the opposite. Among the people who've spent $500 or more, half of them said that they want it done with them step by step or mostly done for them. Now, that's very different from the folks who have spent little or nothing. Only 37% of that group wanted that level of guided help. The rest wanted a resource they could run with solo. And look, I get the appeal of just give me the resource, right? I mean, look, I built my whole business on resources for years, but the data is saying something else. The people who have actually spent real money trying to solve this have learned, probably the hard way, that information by itself doesn't move the needle. So in many cases, it was courses they had taken, programs they had signed up for. They've tried them. They've tried all the courses. They bought the templates and all the tools. They spent a lot of money, especially over the past year, trying to solve this very same problem. But they're still here. They're still stuck, and they were still filling out my survey. Now, I'm pretty good with DIY courses and tool. I'm pretty disciplined when it comes to putting resources to use that I've paid good money for. So this is me just admitting to you guys that, look, I'm human. I've had the same issue. Even I have faltered with DIY content. I've bought courses, I've bought digital products that I either never opened because I was way too busy at the time and I had good intentions, but I meant to just, grab it and then carve out time. And then I forgot about it when I finally did have time. Or maybe I opened it and I just felt overwhelmed once I did that. So I just never implemented the material because I realized that there was a critical support component that I was missing. I needed someone who could answer my nuanced questions to tailor the strategies to my unique situation. And I don't know if it's an age thing or maybe a business maturity thing, but honestly, the older I get, the more I want that kind of support. The less I feel I need just pure information, and the more I just want to sit down with somebody who will listen to me. I said, look, let me net it out for you. Okay, here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. Here's what's getting in my way. Here's what I've tried. Here's what I'm struggling with in terms of, trying to push through those obstacles. I just, I want to make sure that you understand and that we can have a conversation around this and based on everything I just shared with you. And then just start coming up with some ideas. I need you to shine a spotlight on things that maybe I'm not seeing because I have blind spots. Just give it to me straight. That's what I want these days. And I don't think everyone's like this, but I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's an age thing. That's just been me. Now, one more thing before I wrap this up in terms of the findings. Almost nobody in the survey said their problem was learning AI. And I thought that was really interesting. Only 3 people out of the 58 picked that as their top concern. But, and this is what's cool, or maybe not cool, just I thought it was really interesting. AI showed up in one form or another in nearly 4 out of 10 of the open-ended answers. So it's everywhere. And talk about everything else in terms of clients pulling back or work feeling less special, wonder if you're keeping up. But almost nobody thinks the fix is another AI course. I mean, nobody who responded, almost nobody, felt that this is really what they needed. So it seems to me that AI is basically the wrapper around most of the other things that are happening to you right now, directly or indirectly. So where does this leave us? Well, if I had to sum it up based on 58 survey responses and 5, actually it was 4, not 5, it was 4 really good, honest conversations. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, is this, or maybe a couple of sentences. A lot of you are standing at a real crossroads. You're trying to navigate it. You're doing your best. You're often doing it alone, mostly late at night, mostly in your own head, or maybe in your own head and with a chatbot that's happy to agree with whatever you say. And here's what I've learned. Watching this happen to person after person, and honestly, watching some version of that happen to me too, you cannot think your way through this one by yourself. I have tried. I've seen others try. And honestly, for me, I've tried this for longer and more times than I'd like to admit. I've been going through a business transformation myself over the past few months, actually almost over the past year or so, since last fall. There's no official time, but I remember last fall is when I was making big decisions on this, and it's taken a lot of feedback and support from others to make it work. I found that when I tried to figure it all out on my own, my head is such a limited place. I had so many blind spots, so much baggage. I was making so many assumptions that weren't even serving me that I was getting nowhere, which is exactly why I realized, you know what? I need to build something. I need to create something that might help a few people. And this is not for everybody, but I built something based on what I learned. It's called the Next Chapter Sprint. It's simple on purpose. It's a very short, bounded workshop style engagement. It's not a program. It's not a 12-month retainer. It's not a set of templates. It's not a digital product. It's a dedicated block of time where you and I work together one-on-one to get you unstuck on exactly the stage that you're actually in, whether that's deciding what's next or testing whether the market wants it or laying out the actual action plan to get there. Now, I don't want to turn this episode into a commercial, so I'm going to make this quick. If this sounds like something you'd like to explore, shoot me a quick email with the words next chapter in the subject line, and I'll respond with all the details. No obligation. Nobody's going to hound you. So we'll do that. That way we don't take up the rest of this episode with a commercial. I will say this. I've opened 3 spots for this engagement. Again, it's one-on-one, 3 individuals, and it's on a first-come basis. There is a very simple application process where I'll ask you a few questions just to make sure we're a fit. And because I'm working on wrapping up my coaching business over the next few months, I have to be honest with you, this may be the only time I offer this. That's not a countdown clock. I'm not trying to create urgency. I'm just trying to be transparent about where I am in my coaching journey. I have a lot of plates in the air right now in the middle of this transition, and I may be wrapping things up with coaching sooner than later. This actually happened with my AI Advantage Bootcamp. I just decided earlier this year to just stop running it and didn't announce it. I didn't make a big deal and say, okay, this is the last cohort. No, I just stopped. I just realized that it was time. And I still, to this day, have several people reaching out to me every month asking about it and when I'll offer again. So anyway, that's it. That's my pitch for the Next Chapter Sprint. So I'll leave you there. I think this is really interesting. I see a serious inflection point in our industry right now. I've been seeing this for months. The results of this survey were very telling. And I hope that, you find some good information or insights in what I shared with you today. Maybe may help you feel that you're not alone, that many of your peers are feeling the same kind of pressures, the same questions, and the same decisions that you might be trying to make yourself. So thanks for listening. Thanks for trusting me enough to fill out that survey in the first place if you're one of the 58 who did. And I really mean that. It meant a lot to me that you took the time to do it because this one gave me a lot to think about. And I hope that it did the same for you. All right. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk again real soon.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And just a quick reminder to grab your free copy of my latest book, Earn More in Less Time: The Proven Mindset, Strategies, and Actions to Prosper as a Freelance Writer. You can get your free copy at b2blauncher.com, where you will also find the detailed show notes to this and all my other episodes. Enjoy and have a great day.